I come from South Africa, Cape Town.
Mhm.
So obviously the first 45 years of my life I've spent there. And as you might know, we are bilingual, as if we speak English and Afrikaans. Afrikaans, and you have to learn it if you're an English-speaking person, and vice versa. So basically, most South Africans can speak English and Afrikaans, but then, of course, we've got 11 official African languages, Xhosa being the most spoken in the whole of South Africa. Xhosa was introduced into schools as well. So a lot of the children from, I'd say, about 25 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer, have started learning Xhosa in schools. But it's not a requirement to pass it at the end of your schooling. Only English and Afrikaans are. Afrikaans mostly benefited me when I started working at the age of 18, because you come across different languages as you speak to people over the telephone. And if somebody speaks to you in Afrikaans, it's polite to speak back in Afrikaans. If you struggle and you can't think of a word, you obviously then say to the person, would you mind if I switch to English? And normally they can also speak a bit of English, so they'll say it's fine, but it's a polite thing to ask and to speak both languages. So it comes in handy when you're dealing with patients, because I used to work in private hospitals. So when the patient walks in and you know that they're Afrikaans, you speak to them in Afrikaans. And if they're English, you speak English.
What about here in Manchester? Have you used the Afrikaans here as well?
Not much. I work with a colleague who is also South African, so the two of us will sometimes have a little bit of a little thing in Afrikaans if we don't want anybody else to know what we're saying. But I don't get to practice very often. I try now and again reading an Afrikaans book or watching something on a movie, just to sort of keep in the flow of having it fresh in my mind.
Okay.
I'm English born and bred. I mean, I've travelled a little bit around the world, being ex-military. As a youngster at school, English was obviously just the only language. Going back into the 60s and 70s, there were attempts for, when you went to secondary school, you were required to learn French, obligatory, at the age of 13 or 14, but most of us only got to learn perhaps a few words. It's not like in European schools where English is generally, like as it is in South Africa, a second language. In this country, and in particular in my time in the 60s, 70s and 80s, England wasn't, although it may have been sort of multicultural, it wasn't multilingual. English people had a reputation back then, perhaps not now, but then, of being generally lazy when it comes to language. The general opinion being, well, if I went abroad to Spain, everyone speaks English. If I went abroad to such and such, everyone speaks English, and there's no point in me learning. I think it's a little bit different in schools these days, but in my early days of school, it was certainly not a common thing. Even as a multicultural society we are then, even then, most people who came from abroad had a good command of English. So there wasn't really a necessity then, although probably in a lot of schools may well be multilingual simply because we are a multicultural society of a greater degree now.
Oh, I enjoy it because I work in a hospital situation where we have Spanish, Portuguese, we have an Italian consultant, we've got Indian, so it's a whole lot of cultures and languages, and we all sort of learn a little bit from each other, which is great, really. Trying to get your tongue around, trying to say words like in Portuguese or Spanish, or like this. There's a young girl now that's Spanish, and she says Barcelona. So it's like, you've got to I always try and say it the way the person says it, so that it sounds more authentic. But yeah, I find it quite intriguing.
Yeah, I work in a hospital environment where, as Charmaine has said, it's very multicultural. The NHS promotes sort of multiculturalism and interracism. What you do find is because people have so adapted to an English way of thinking, for want of a better word, or a cultural way of thinking in this country, you tend not to notice someone being from another country.
Really?
Simply because because like I say, I've worked in the NS for 20 years and worked with many different nationalities. I never even think of them being from another culture, regardless of the colour or skin or the dialect or the tone of language or phraseology. Generally speaking, you don't see. I don't see them as from another culture or society. I just see them as a person to whom I'm able to relate to, and I think it's only if you seriously, really wanted to think in a, for want of a better word, racialist or cultural manner, would it even begin to dawn on someone, I would think, that someone's a little bit different to them. But as I see it, I never see them as from somewhere else. I just see them for whom they are and what they are.
I see different cultures, different languages, and I'm interested by them. So, for me, it's interesting to know little things like what they celebrate and how they celebrate their Christmases or their Easters and what type of foods they eat. Like I said, our work environment, there's so many different cultures and languages that we learn a lot from each other, food-wise, culture-wise. And I find that very interesting.